What exactly is poverty? Poverty is simply another word for being poor. Most people don't want to be poor. If we define it precisely, we can know better what it is and how to avoid or escape it. To help see poverty in its origin, let's imagine some castaways on a deserted tropical island. The ship is sunk. They have nothing but the clothes on their back. They don't have food, shelter, or medicine. They'll die shortly if they don't do something. These castaways are desperately poor, which is the path to misery and early death. Where people are very poor, we find sickness, disease, and short lifespans. Anyone who values life does not want to live in dire poverty. Poverty is the absence of wealth, and at least some wealth is necessary for life. So, the solution to the problem of poverty is simple: the creation of wealth. Throughout history, most people were not free to create wealth. Anything they created or produced was taken from them by a master, a king, a pharaoh, or some other ruling force. People were treated like slaves. Often they actually were slaves, and still are today in some parts of the world. When commanded to work by threats of physical punishment, the incentive for a slave is to produce the bare minimum needed to avoid the whip or chain. We call that the slave incentive. Why would a slave produce any more than the bare minimum? Why would a slave look for inventive ways to increase his productivity when anything he creates is taken from him? The answer is, he wouldn't. And in fact, people living under the slave incentive didn't. For thousands of years, most people did not create much wealth. And what little they did create was often taken from them by force. The result was that the vast majority of mankind lived in miserable poverty all over the world. But freedom opens up a new path where people can keep the wealth they create, offering a different kind of incentive, the freedom incentive. People who are free are more inventive, they're more innovative, more productive. Because people living under laws that protect freedom and personal property get to keep whatever they create. And here we see another historical fact. Where people have the incentive to keep what they create, they tend to create more, much more. The graph you see shows the total global amount of wealth throughout history. Notice how the line is relatively flat and low for thousands of years. There was very little wealth in the world, almost all of which was controlled by a handful of tyrants backed by the power of armies, navies, and police forces. But notice what happens to the curve in the middle part of the 1700s. The curve dramatically goes up. This represents an unprecedented growth and expansion in the creation of wealth. More people created more wealth after the 1700s than ever before. For the first time, laws started protecting individual freedom and personal property rights, rather than limiting freedom and violating property rights. Many people responded to this newly enjoyed freedom by creating and inventing all kinds of new wealth. When people become more productive, they create wealth. And as they create wealth, they solve the problem of poverty all on their own.